They didn't even lower their voices. That was the part that still stings when I think about it. We were sitting around my sister-in-law's dining table, plates barely touched, wine already flowing. Someone asked me, casually, carelessly, how work was going. Before I could answer, my brother-in-law laughed. "Still playing shopkeeper on the internet," he said, swirling his glass. "Selling candles or something." The table erupted. Not cruel laughter. Not loud laughter. The worst kind. Polite. Comfortable. Certain. I felt my cheeks warm, but I kept my smile steady. I'd learned how to do that. Smile without giving anything away. "It's an online store," I said calmly. "Yes." "Oh, come on," my sister-in-law chimed in. "It's cute. Like a hobby." "Hobbies don't pay mortgages," someone else added. My brother leaned back in his chair, smug. "Exactly. Some of us have real jobs." I nodded. And that's when the thought passed through my mind, quiet, sharp, and grounding. They didn't know what I had already done. Later that night, as I drove home alone, their laughter replayed in my head. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified something I'd been avoiding. They didn't respect me because they didn't understand me. And they didn't understand me because I'd made sure they didn't. The store had started small. So small it almost felt embarrassing to say out loud. One product. A basic website. Orders I packed myself on the kitchen counter after work. No investors. No fancy branding. No announcements. Just me, my laptop, and a problem I knew how to solve better than anyone else. I never talked about numbers. That was my first rule. People treat you differently the moment they think they can measure you. At family gatherings, I stayed vague. "How's the store?" "Busy," I'd say. "Making money yet?" "Enough." They always smiled at that. The kind of smile that says she's trying. What I didn't realize then was how invested they were in that version of me. The harmless one. The struggling one. The one they could feel superior to. My brother-in-law, Tom, loved to give advice. "You should really get a corporate job," he told me once, patting my arm. "Benefits. Stability." My sister-in-law nodded. "Online stuff is risky. Algorithms change." I thanked them. Always thanked them. Because correcting them would have required explaining. And explaining would have ruined everything. The truth was, my tiny store had started funding things long before they noticed anything was different. First, it paid off my credit cards. Quietly. Then my car. Then my emergency savings grew large enough that I stopped checking it daily. I upgraded nothing outwardly. No new clothes. No flashy purchases. No hints. I learned early that visibility invites opinions. And opinions slow you down. What they didn't see were the nights I stayed up refining listings while they slept. The spreadsheets. The supplier negotiations. The emails from customers thanking me for solving a problem they'd been ignored over. They thought I was lucky. I was disciplined. The comments got sharper as time passed. "Still doing that little store? Must be nice not having real pressure. I wish I had time for side projects." Side project. I repeated the words in my head like a joke they didn't know they were telling. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon. My sister-in-law mentioned, casually, that their mortgage payment had gone up. "Interest rates," she sighed. "Everything's tighter now." Tom shook his head. "We'll manage. But it's stressful." I nodded sympathetically. What I didn't say was that their lender was one of my biggest customers. And every month, without fail, my tiny online store sent them money. Not directly, but reliably. Predictably. Enough to cover what they owed. I looked around that table, at the people who laughed, advised, dismissed. And for the first time, I wondered how they'd react if they knew the truth. Not yet. Not then. Because the most powerful moment isn't when people find out you're doing well. It's when they realize you've been doing well the entire time. And they were too busy mocking to notice. That night, as I packed orders at my kitchen counter, I smiled to myself. Because the store they joked about? It wasn't small anymore. And soon, whether I wanted it or not, they were going to feel exactly how dependent they'd been on something they never took seriously. The strange thing about success is how invisible it can be when you don't announce it. My store grew quietly. No viral moment. No sudden flood of attention. Just a steady, deliberate expansion that most people would have found boring. And that's why it worked. While my family joked about my little online shop, I was renegotiating supplier contracts at my kitchen table. I learned how to speak in margins instead of emotions. 5% here. 2% there. It didn't sound impressive. But compounded over time, it became something else entirely. What I didn't realize then was how much discipline looks like stagnation to people who need constant proof. Tom sent me a link one afternoon. A job posting. Thought this might be more stable for you, he wrote. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I was tempted, but because I finally understood something about him. He needed me to be worried. Because if I wasn't, then his advice meant nothing. I thanked him and didn't apply. The store's first real jump came from a problem no one else wanted to touch. A product category with high returns, picky customers, and complicated logistics. Everyone avoided it. I leaned in. I rewrote the listings. Changed the packaging. Added instructions no one else bothered with. The returns dropped. The reviews climbed. Sales followed. Slowly at first. Then with a confidence that didn't ask permission. At dinner, my sister-in-law asked, "So, how many orders do you even get?" I shrugged. "It varies." She smiled. "Must be nice not having deadlines." I swallowed my response. Because I had deadlines. They just weren't visible. By the second year, the store paid for more than my lifestyle. It paid for other people's. I didn't know their names. Didn't need to. I saw them as line items. Regular. Predictable. Reliable. When one account slipped behind, I noticed immediately. When payments posted on time, I barely glanced. That's when I understood the shift. Dependence doesn't always look like need. Sometimes it looks like comfort. Tom complained constantly about money. Not in crisis. Just enough to signal stress. Mortgage rates are brutal, he'd say. Feels like we're running just to stay in place. I nodded sympathetically. What I didn't realize then was how much he resented that I never joined in. Never complained. Never asked for help. The store stopped feeling like something I ran. It started feeling like something that ran with me. I hired help. Quietly. No announcements. No LinkedIn posts. Just a woman who packed orders faster than I did and didn't ask questions. Then another. And another. At family gatherings, I still said I handled everything myself. Technically, that wasn't true anymore. But perception has value. One evening, while reviewing monthly statements, I noticed something that made me pause. A familiar name. A bank. Their bank. I traced the flow backward, then forward again. And there it was. Month after month. My revenue covering obligations that had nothing to do with me, except that it did. What I didn't realize then was how fragile that balance was. And how quickly gratitude turns into entitlement when people don't know the source. Tom made a joke at the next dinner. "Careful," he said, raising his glass toward me. "She'll sell us something next." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Because he already had. He just didn't know it. That night, as I locked my laptop, I felt something new. Not satisfaction. Responsibility. Because when people depend on you without knowing it, you carry power they never consented to give you. And power, real power, asks one question eventually. What will you do with it? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew one thing for certain. The day they found out wouldn't be gentle. Because mockery hardens people. And truth has a way of landing hardest on those who thought they were standing above it. The first threat didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as an inconvenience. A supplier email. Short. Polite. Final. We'll be adjusting minimum order quantities effective next month. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Because I knew what that meant. Higher upfront costs. Tighter cash flow. Less margin for error. Most people would have panicked. I made tea. Panic clouds judgment. Pressure reveals it. I ran the numbers 3 times. Then a 4th. The store could handle the increase, but only if everything else stayed stable. And nothing ever does. What I didn't realize then was how closely that timing would collide with my family's assumptions about me. Tom called that weekend. "Hey," he said. "We're thinking of refinancing." I closed my eyes. "That's a big step," I replied. "Rates are weird," he said. "But it might lower monthly payments." I hummed thoughtfully. "What made you think of it now?" I asked. He laughed. "Life," he said. "Kids. Expenses. You know how it is." I did. Better than he realized. At Sunday dinner, the jokes returned. "Still running your little empire?" my brother asked, smirking. I smiled. "Still running," I said. He nodded like that confirmed something. What I didn't realize then was how much comfort they took in that image. Me hovering at the same level while they struggled upward. The next week, a platform policy changed. Nothing dramatic. Just a tweak. Shipping windows tightened. Customer expectations rose. I adjusted immediately. Stayed up late rewriting messages. Updated listings. Absorbed costs temporarily. But pressure compounds. And for the first time, I felt it pushing back. My sister-in-law texted me one night. "Do you think online stores are risky long-term?" I stared at the message. Then typed. "Any income source is risky if you don't understand it." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Dismissive. Comforted. What I didn't realize then was how close I was to becoming something they'd never prepared for. I met with my accountant the following Friday. He frowned at the screen. "You're carrying a lot of responsibility," he said. "For who?" I asked. He glanced at me. "For people who don't even know your name." That landed harder than I expected. The real test came the following month. A delayed shipment. A spike in customer inquiries. A short window to fix both. I worked 16-hour days. 8 standing up. Slept lightly. The store dipped, not dangerously, but noticeably. And that was enough. Tom called again. "Bad timing," he said. "The bank wants updated income statements." I inhaled slowly. "For you?" I asked. "For us," he said. "It's fine. Just stressful." I imagined the line items. The ratios. The dependence. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped. Not permanently. Just paused. The thought startled me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was possible. At dinner, Tom complained louder than usual. "Feels like we're always one step behind," he said. "Meanwhile, some people just get lucky." His eyes flicked to me. Something sharp passed through me. Lucky. That word people use when they don't want to acknowledge effort. I smiled anyway. "Luck helps," I said. He nodded, satisfied. That night, alone in my kitchen, surrounded by orders and invoices, I felt the weight of the truth. They weren't mocking my store anymore. They were depending on it. And dependence without respect is dangerous. Because it breeds entitlement. What I didn't realize then was that the next choice I made, the quietest one, would change how they saw me forever. And possibly whether they could afford not to. The request came disguised as concern. That's how these things usually arrive. Tom called on a Wednesday afternoon, voice softened, careful, the tone people use when they think they're being generous. "We've been talking," he said. "About you." I held the phone between my shoulder and ear, sealing a shipping box. "About what?" I asked. "Well," he continued, "your future. Stability. You know, long term." I stopped taping. Listened. He cleared his throat. "We think it's time you got serious." There it was. Not advice. Permission. Serious about what? I asked. "A real job," he said. "Benefits. Predictable income." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "And the store?" I asked. "Well," he hesitated. "That can stay a side thing. Or maybe you sell it while it still has value." Sell it. Like it was a used couch. At Sunday dinner, they followed through. My sister-in-law leaned forward, sympathetic smile locked in place. "We just worry about you," she said. "What if something happens? Online stuff is so unstable." My brother nodded. "You don't want to be 60 still packing boxes." Everyone laughed. I didn't. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked calmly. Tom shrugged. "Then you're choosing uncertainty." I looked around the table. At the people whose certainty arrived every month because of something they mocked. And something inside me hardened. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was hurt. Because I was awake to something I'd been avoiding. They didn't just underestimate me. They felt entitled to decide when I stopped. Because in their minds, my store was imaginary, unless it failed. Only then would it become real. The next morning, I met with my accountant again. "I want to restructure," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "That's not small." "No," I agreed. "It's intentional." We talked for hours. Entities. Firewalls. Distance. Not to hide. To clarify. What I didn't realize then was how quickly clarity feels like cruelty to people used to control. The following month, I made one adjustment. Just one. A policy change. Still ethical. Still legal. But no longer accommodating comfort. Payment terms tightened. Timing shifted. Nothing dramatic. But enough. Tom called me 3 weeks later. Panicked. "Something's wrong," he said. "Our payment didn't post." I checked my dashboard. "It did," I said. "Well, the bank says." "I know what the bank says," I replied calmly. There was silence. "What changed?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair. "I stopped subsidizing inefficiency," I said. He laughed nervously. "You're talking like a business." I smiled. "I am a business." At the next dinner, the mood was different. No jokes. No advice. Just tension stretched thin. My sister-in-law finally broke. "You never told us you were doing that well," she said. I met her eyes. "You never asked," I replied. Tom's jaw tightened. "We wouldn't have joked," he said. "No," I agreed softly. "You would have competed." That landed. They wanted transparency now. Explanations. Numbers. Context. I gave them none. Because transparency is earned, not demanded once the power shifts. Later that night, my brother cornered me. "You could have helped us more," he said. I tilted my head. "I did," I replied. "For years." He opened his mouth. Then closed it. Because suddenly, the math was visible. And it was uncomfortable. What I didn't realize then was how quickly respect shows up when dependence is threatened. Not gratitude. Fear. Because they'd built their certainty on something they didn't bother to understand. And now that thing had boundaries. I stood in my kitchen after they left, surrounded by orders waiting to ship. The same counter. The same laptop. But the balance had changed. They crossed a line the moment they tried to decide my future while standing on the foundation I built. And from that moment on, there was no going back to being small for their comfort. They stopped joking after that. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like people realizing the floor beneath them isn't as solid as they assumed. The first real question came from my sister-in-law. Not at dinner. Not in front of anyone else. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon, voice tight with something she was trying to keep under control. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," I replied. "How big is it?" she asked. I knew exactly what she meant. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the same one I'd packed orders on for years. "Big enough," I said. There was a pause. "Are we okay?" she asked. That question told me everything. At dinner that weekend, they circled me carefully, like I might correct them if they said the wrong thing. Tom didn't look at me when he spoke. "The bank's being difficult," he muttered. "Suddenly wants more documentation." I nodded sympathetically. "What kind?" I asked. "Revenue stability," he said. "Cash flow predictability." I kept my expression neutral. Inside, the math was clean. Too clean. A week later, Tom asked to meet for coffee. Alone. That was new. He arrived early, already fidgeting with his cup. "You didn't tell us," he said as soon as I sat down. I wrapped my hands around my mug. "You didn't listen," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "This affects us," he said. I tilted my head. "How?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because," he said slowly, "we built our plans around assumptions." I waited. "That nothing would change," he finished. There it was. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't accuse. I just asked one question. "What assumption did you make about me?" He looked down. "That you'd always be doing your thing," he said. Quietly. I nodded. "And what did you build on top of that?" I asked. Silence. Because saying it out loud would have made it undeniable. The next month, the bank escalated. Letters. Requests. Deadlines. Tom started calling more frequently, asking questions that were no longer disguised as concern. "How flexible are your payments? Could you smooth things out temporarily? Just until things stabilize." I listened. Then I answered honestly. "No." The word landed like a dropped plate. At the next family gathering, the truth finally surfaced. My brother spoke first. "So," he said, forcing a laugh, "apparently you're some kind of silent partner in our lives." The room went still. I set my fork down. "I never offered," I said. "You assumed." Tom snapped. "You let us think it was nothing." I met his eyes. "You laughed when I told you it was something," I replied. That shut him up. My mother tried to smooth it over. "Family helps family," she said gently. I nodded. "I did," I said. "Until you tried to decide my future for me." No one spoke. Because now the timeline was visible. The jokes. The advice. The entitlement. All stacked neatly against the truth. That night, Tom called again. Angrier this time. "You're putting us in a position," he said. I stayed calm. "No," I replied. "I stopped protecting you from reality." He scoffed. "So this is revenge?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "No," I said. "This is alignment." The next morning, I reviewed my accounts. Everything was stable. More than stable. Expandable. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. What do I owe people who only respected me once they needed me? The answer came easily. Nothing beyond fairness. And fairness doesn't require self-sacrifice. Tom texted me later that day. "We might need to make some changes." I stared at the message. Then replied. So did I. What I didn't realize then was that the next conversation would be the one they remembered forever. Not because of what I took away, but because of what I refused to give back. and how clearly it would expose the difference between support and dependence. The house didn't go on the market right away. That would have been too dramatic. Instead, there were small changes. Subtle ones. Tom stopped upgrading his phone. My sister-in-law mentioned cutting back on extras. The kids' activities were suddenly on pause. They never said why. They didn't have to. Tom's calls changed tone. Less demanding. More careful. Just checking in, he'd say. Wanted your thoughts. I noticed the way he framed everything now, like I might withdraw something if he said the wrong word. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself in how people speak to you. At dinner, the jokes were gone. So was the advice. In its place was something heavier. Respect, maybe. Or fear. They asked me how business was going, and waited for the answer. When I said, steady, they nodded like that meant something entirely different now. One night, my sister-in-law knocked on my door. Alone. She looked smaller somehow. I didn't mean to mock you, she said quietly. I believed her. I know, I replied. But we didn't think it was this, she added. I gestured toward the kitchen. It didn't need to be, I said. It just needed to be respected. She swallowed. Tom's struggling, she admitted. I nodded. I know. A week later, Tom finally said the thing he'd been circling for months. We might have to sell, he said over the phone. I closed my eyes. Not in satisfaction. In understanding. That's a hard decision, I said. You could help, he added quickly. Just a little. We'd pay you back. I chose my words carefully. I won't, I said. Silence. You're choosing your store over family, he said bitterly. I inhaled slowly. No, I replied. I'm choosing boundaries. The sale happened quietly. No announcements. No pity. Just a for sale sign that appeared one afternoon and was gone 3 weeks later. They moved into something smaller. Further out. More manageable. They didn't tell me the numbers. I didn't ask. At the next family gathering, everything had shifted. Not tense. Resolved. Tom spoke less. Listened more. When he did speak, it wasn't to advise. It was to ask. Later that evening, my brother pulled me aside. You changed, he said. I smiled softly. No, I replied. I stopped shrinking. He nodded. Because now, he understood the difference. The store kept running. Expanding. Funding things far beyond one mortgage. Employees. Communities. My own peace. And strangely enough, I felt lighter. Not because they struggled, but because I no longer carried their expectations. One night, as I closed my laptop, I thought back to that dinner. The laughter, the jokes, the certainty. How easily people dismiss what they don't understand. And how quickly they rewrite history once they depend on it. What I didn't realize then was that the final act of this story wasn't about money at all. It was about dignity. And dignity doesn't negotiate. Years later, no one jokes about my store anymore. They don't call it cute. They don't ask when I'll get a real job. They ask questions carefully now. Respect has a tone. The house they live in today is smaller, quieter, more intentional. They don't complain about it. And I don't mention the one they used to have. Because some lessons don't need to be revisited to remain learned. My store doesn't look impressive from the outside. No flashy branding. No social media bragging. No headlines. It doesn't need them. It runs on systems, not attention. On discipline, not approval. Sometimes, I still pack and order myself. Not because I have to. Because I remember. The counter. The late nights. The laughter that sharpened my focus instead of dulling it. At family gatherings, I sit where I always have. Same chair. Same table. But the space around me feels different. They listen when I speak. Not because I demand it. Because they learned what happens when they don't. My sister-in-law thanked me once. Quietly. For not saying, "I told you so," she said. I smiled. "I never needed to," I replied. The truth is, I didn't build my store to prove them wrong. I built it because I saw a gap and filled it. Their mockery just made me quieter. And silence, I learned, is an excellent place to grow. What stayed with me most wasn't the moment they realized the truth. It was the years before. When they laughed and I listened. When they advised and I worked. When they assumed and I planned. That's where the real story lived. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about money. It's about humility. About never confusing visibility with value. About understanding that some of the strongest foundations are built where no one is looking. I still run a tiny online store. At least, that's what it would look like to someone skimming the surface. And that's fine with me. Because the best kind of success doesn't need witnesses. It just needs consistency. So when I think back to that dinner, the laughter, the confidence, the way they dismissed something they didn't understand, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel grateful. Because while they were mocking my store, it was paying their mortgage. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.